I replaced our shared fence and covered the cost. Didn't ask them for a dime. A week later, they sued me for blocking light. When I showed up in court with photos, he said, "This is about respect." What the judge said next made him storm out of the room. We'd lived side by side for almost 9 years without anything more than the occasional, "How's it going?" across the lawn. Not exactly friends, but not enemies either. Just quiet neighbors with a shared fence and an unspoken agreement to stay out of each other's business. Our fence had been leaning for a couple of years, one of those long wooden ones that was probably put up in the 90s. I knew it was going to fall eventually. I waited, maybe too long, hoping he'd offer to go halves. He never did. Not even when a windstorm knocked 2 panels clean off. So I just did it. Called a contractor, got a fair quote, and had the whole thing replaced with a new wooden fence. Nothing flashy, same height, same placement, just clean and sturdy. I didn't ask him for a dime. I figure it was easier to eat the costs than deal with the back and forth. A week later, I got served. He was suing me for blocking natural light. Claimed the new fence cast shadows on his vegetable garden. Said I disrespected him by not consulting before making a major change to the property. I laughed when I read it. I really thought it was a joke. The court date came, and I walked in with my binder full of photos. Photos of the old leaning fence. Photos of the new one, same height, same position. Even screenshots from Google Street View showing how nothing had changed, but the wood being less rotten. When it was his turn to speak, he stood there in front of the judge and said, "This isn't about light. This is about respect." He actually said that, like he was in some kind of movie. The judge blinked and looked at him for a long second. Then she said, "Sir, if this is about respect, you've brought your case to the wrong courtroom. This court deals with facts and laws, not feelings." He tried to say something else, but the judge held up her hand. "You're wasting the court's time," she said. Case dismissed. He didn't even wait for the gavel. Just turned around and stormed out of the room. I stood there for a second, holding my binder, not sure whether to be angry or relieved. The judge gave me a small nod like she was trying not to roll her eyes. The fence is still there. He doesn't speak to me anymore. Not even a head nod when we both happen to take the trash out at the same time. But you know what? I think he's still mad because I didn't give him a chance to say no. I didn't ask for his permission. I just did it. And some people would rather live with a broken fence than feel like they weren't in control. This all started with a leaning fence and a quiet neighbor who'd never once helped with anything. For almost a decade, we lived next to each other without issue. His name was Ray. Older guy, retired, always wearing the same navy windbreaker no matter the weather. We nodded in passing. Never more than that. It was fine. I didn't need a friend next door. I just needed peace. Our houses sat close. Typical suburban setup. One strip of lawn between us, divided by a long, weather-warped wooden fence that had clearly seen better decades. It leaned a little more each year. I knew it wasn't going to hold through another winter. Still, I waited. Maybe out of courtesy. Maybe I just didn't want to deal with it. After a storm knocked down 2 sections last fall, I figured that was the final sign. I called 3 contractors, picked the most reasonable one, and scheduled the replacement. Same size, same spot, just new wood. I didn't knock on his door. I didn't ask for money. I just paid for the whole thing. It felt cleaner that way. Easier. No argument, no split decisions, no awkward waiting. The fence went up in a day and a half. Looked good. Clean, solid lines. I didn't even think about it after that. Until a week later, when a guy in a blue jacket knocked on my door and handed me a lawsuit. Ray was suing me. According to the papers, the new fence blocked vital natural light from reaching his backyard garden. He was claiming damages for interference with quiet enjoyment, which I had to look up twice just to understand what the hell it meant. At first, I thought it was some weird mistake. He'd never mentioned the garden. Never said a word about the fence, before or after. But it was real. I had to show up in court. I spent 2 nights putting together a binder. Photos from before and after, measuring tape shots, Google Street View from the last 5 years. I even got a statement from the contractor saying the new fence was identical in height and position to the old one. Court was small. Just a county room with a tired-looking judge and 6 chairs. Ray wore a suit. First time I'd ever seen him in anything other than that windbreaker. He had a whole folder with him. Said he had documentation. When the judge asked him to explain the issue, he went on a rant about how I disrespected him, how he'd lived here longer, how I didn't even knock. He didn't mention the light until the end. And then he looked at me and said, "This isn't really about the fence. It's about respect." The judge leaned back in her chair. "I see," she said. "And how does that relate to your claim of property damage?" Ray got flustered. Said something about principle. The judge cut him off. "This court isn't here to sort out your personal feelings about your neighbor," she said. "We deal in facts. And right now, I don't see any evidence that this new fence caused measurable harm." She turned to me. "You have photos?" I handed them over. She flipped through them quietly, nodded once. Then she looked back at Ray. "Sir," she said, "you filed a lawsuit over a fence that hasn't changed in height, placement, or impact, aside from being repaired. If this was about light, you'd need expert testimony. If it's about respect, you need a different kind of help." He stared at her for a long time. Then, without a word, he shoved his folder into his bag and walked out. Didn't even wait for her to say the case was dismissed. Afterward, she looked at me and said, "People don't like losing control of the things they think belong to them, even if it's just half a fence." She didn't say it with judgment, just like someone who'd seen this before. Ray hasn't spoken to me since. No eye contact. No whoops. He's out in his yard sometimes, pretending not to notice me. But I know he's still angry. Not about the fence. Not really. It's what the judge said. People hate feeling like they weren't asked, like they weren't needed. And I didn't need him. 3 weeks after the court date, something weird started happening. At first, it was little things. I'd come outside and find trash blown against my side of the fence. Fast food wrappers, empty bottles. I figured it was just wind. But it kept happening, always the same kind of junk, always pushed up against the new boards. Then one morning, I found a long black scratch across the lowest panel. It looked like it had been done with a rock or something sharp. Just one line, deep and fresh. I didn't say anything. I just took photos. I started keeping a folder. About a week later, I noticed a faint chemical smell coming from the base of the fence. I followed it, and sure enough, there were patches of dead grass running along my side. Like someone had poured something right at the line. That's when I set up a camera. I didn't want to. Felt paranoid. But it was a simple motion-activated one, tucked into the gutter. It pointed straight at the fence line, angled down just enough to catch anything happening near the bottom panels. 2 nights later, I got a clip. Ray, out there around 11:45 p.m., crouching by the fence with a jug. He poured something clear in a straight line, looked both ways, then walked back inside. I watched it 3 times, just to be sure. The next morning, I printed stills from the footage. I wrote a calm, 1-sentence note. "If you damage my property again, I'll report this to the police." I slipped it into his mailbox and left it at that. No response. No eye contact. But the dead grass stopped. The trash stopped. The scratches stopped. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe that was his little outburst and now he was done. But then, about a month later, I came home from work to find 2 city officials standing in my front yard. One was holding a clipboard. The other was taking pictures. "Someone filed a complaint," the clipboard guy said, "about a zoning violation related to your new fence." I felt my chest tighten. "What kind of violation?" He said something about setback requirements and visibility from the street. Total nonsense. The fence hadn't moved an inch from where it had been since the 90s. But apparently, someone had submitted a formal complaint with diagrams and photos. "Can I ask who filed it?" I said. He looked at his sheet. It was anonymous. Of course it was. I had to spend the next 2 weeks digging up paperwork, calling the city office, showing them permits from the contractor. Luckily, I kept everything. They closed the case. Said I was in the clear. But that's when it really hit me. Ray wasn't just mad. He wanted to win. He couldn't get the court to side with him. Couldn't vandalize the fence without getting caught. So now he was going to try and bury me in paperwork and complaints. And I had a feeling he wasn't done. I started keeping a notebook. Every time something happened, I wrote it down. Date, time, what I saw or smelled or heard. I printed photos and labeled them. I made folders, physical ones, not just on my computer. If he was going to keep coming at me, I wasn't going to be the guy who got caught off guard. The next twist came in the form of a dog. Ray didn't have a dog. Not in all the years I'd lived there. But suddenly, one evening, I heard barking. Short, sharp bursts. Angry. I looked over the fence and saw him standing in his yard with a medium-sized black mutt on a leash. No collar, no tags. The barking didn't stop after that. The dog would run the length of the fence, growling and snarling every time I stepped outside. If I opened my back door, it would lunge toward the sound. I didn't feel safe walking into my own yard anymore. I started using the front door for everything. One morning, I saw a fresh pile of dog crap right at the base of my driveway. Not on the sidewalk, on my side. The shape of it told me everything. It wasn't random. It was placed. I didn't say a word to Ray. I just added it to the log. Took photos. Bagged it with gloves and threw it out. But I wasn't the only one who noticed the dog. A couple weeks later, I saw the mail carrier talking to Ray at the curb. I couldn't hear what was said, but her body language told the story. She was pointing toward the fence, shaking her head. The dog barked wildly from behind him the whole time. The next day, she skipped our block entirely. 2 days later, I got a notice from USPS. They were suspending delivery to our addresses until the aggressive dog situation was resolved. That was the first time I saw Ray smile. He stood at the edge of his driveway that afternoon while I picked up my mail at the distribution center downtown. He didn't wave. Didn't say anything. Just watched. That smile broke something in me. I went back home and called animal control. Filed a formal report. Gave them footage from the camera, pictures of the dog lunging at the fence, and the notice from USPS. I handed it over like evidence in a trial. 3 days later, they showed up at his door. I watched from my living room window. The visit lasted 15 minutes. When they left, the dog was gone. I never saw it again. That night, he came to my door. I didn't want to answer, but I did. He stood there, hands in his jacket, staring straight through me. "You just don't quit, do you?" he said. I didn't say anything. I waited. He looked past me into the house. "You think this is over?" "It's not." I closed the door in his face. The next morning, my windshield was cracked. Not shattered, but cracked. Right in the center, like something heavy had been dropped on it. No cameras faced the driveway. Nothing to prove it was him. But I knew. Just like I knew he wouldn't stop until one of us gave up. And I wasn't planning on being the one. I started parking my car inside the garage every night after that. Stopped leaving anything outside I cared about. Took down the camera and moved it to the front of the house. Pointed at the driveway this time. It felt like I was preparing for war. But that's what it had become. Not over a fence. Not really. It was about pride. About control. And the fact that I didn't ask for his opinion, didn't check with him before fixing something that should have been dealt with years ago. That was the real offense. He started getting creative. Someone called the city about my grass being overgrown. It wasn't. But I still got a courtesy notice. Then it was a noise complaint, said I was running power tools after hours. I wasn't. Then a second complaint about the fence, claiming I used treated wood that was leaking chemicals. That one got dropped fast. I couldn't prove any of it was him. He never signed anything. Never showed up when city inspectors came around. But each time, I saw him watching from his window. He wanted me to feel surrounded. Like I couldn't move without being checked. But here's the thing. People get sloppy when they think they're winning. That winter, a neighbor 2 houses down knocked on my door. Said he'd been watching the whole thing unfold. Said he didn't like how Ray handled himself. Then he handed me something. It was a thumb drive. On it, Footage from his new security system. High-res. Wide angle. One clip showed Ray, late at night, walking to the edge of my property with a plastic bag in hand. Another showed him reaching over the fence and scraping something against the wood. And then the one that mattered most, him crouching by my car, a heavy tool in hand. It wasn't just evidence. It was everything. I filed a police report the next morning. Turned it all in. When they came to his house, I watched from my front step. 2 officers, calm and slow, but serious. They didn't arrest him. Not that day. But they talked for a long time. Took a written statement. Logged it officially. After that, it got quiet. He stopped coming outside. Stopped staring. No more notes, no more games. But the quiet wasn't peace. It was tension. It was a line that had been drawn so deeply neither of us could cross it anymore. And every time I step outside, I feel it, that weight. Like something that never got said is still hanging there between us, thicker than the fence ever was. Some mornings, I catch myself looking out the window, not to see if he's out there, but to see if I still care. And I do. Not because I want to fix things. Not because I miss how it was. But because part of me still can't believe that something as small as a fence showed me exactly how far a neighbor would go just to feel taller than the line that divided us. And the truth is, I don't think this was ever about wood or sunlight or rules. It was about someone who hated being reminded he didn't matter in someone else's decision. And now every time I hear a knock, I wonder if it's the next chapter of something that should have ended a long time ago. But maybe the worst part is, I still can't stop checking.